everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grace Speaks, a Grace Church podcast. I am your host, Alexa Stark, and I am joined by my other two hosts.
Mike Vecchio. I am one of the pastors here at Grace.
And I'm Katia Gonzalez. I'm the live stream coordinator here.
And then we also have a special guest.
John Kedash. I am actually joining the podcast. This is my first podcast, so I'm happy to be here today. And we're going to be talking and spending some time discussing marriage and the important topic of marriage.
Which we're really excited to dive deep in with you. So let's get started.
Yeah, so one, I just want to say thanks for being here, John, with us on our podcast. And also, just to dive right in, we just want to get to the viewers to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us about yourself and also your lovely bride and how you met Joy.
Sure. So first of all, I've been coming to Grace for, I've got to think about it now. So my oldest son is 36, and we started coming just when he was born. So we've been coming to Grace for 36 years.
Wow.
And Joy and I have been married now 38 years. So we got married 2 years before that. And we met in college. We met in college. I was actually dating her roommate and ended up, and you'll hear more of this story, I ended up getting to know Joy through dating her roommate, and then that relationship ended, and Joy and I became close friends and then eventually started dating. So that's kind of the short version of what will be a much longer story at another time that we could talk about that. But yeah, that's how we met. It wasn't planned, it wasn't arranged or anything like that, but it was just two people kind of coming together.
It's not my first time hearing a story like that. You just get to know, whoever you're dating, their friends and who's around them. So,
Exactly. And now, so one of the things that we do is we run the Young Married Group, which a couple people here have already been part of, both Alexa and Katia and Matt and Mike.
The two of us.
Yes. And maybe someday
hopefully someday,
Mike might be a part of it. But we've been doing that now for about 4 years, and we're getting ready to start up another group. So we start in September, October, and we run through June. It's generally a one school year.
One very long month.
Yeah, it's a one school year experience from kind of like September to June.
Right.
So we're excited about that.
Yeah.
It was really fun being in it.
Yes, same. Ours ran a little longer.
Yeah,
but I'm glad there is a cutoff now.
Yes.
I feel like that's a good, very organized. But we loved it as well. And sometimes we wish it was still happening. But we know we're not newlyweds anymore.
That's right.
It's still going,
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that we started discussing is should we be expanding beyond young married? Because there are folks who are getting married older. There are folks who are maybe on a second marriage and didn't have success in their first. So that's one of the things we're kind of talking about. It would change the dynamic and chemistry of the group because if you had somebody who's maybe in their 40s or 50s versus all these younger folks. Right. So we've got to think about that a little bit more.
No, that's awesome. And that's something to pray about to, especially. I know anyone I would talk to outside of Grace, when I was a part of the newlywed group, they were like, oh, I wish I had that, when I was married, or I wish I had that at my church. So it is a great ministry.
Yes.
It really is. All right. So I'm going to dive in. I have the first question. All right. So when is the right time for marriage? Because you said some people get married older or younger or whenever. So when do you feel is the right time for marriage?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm going to avoid trying to answer by age because that could vary, right? I mean, some people, my daughter just got engaged, so she's going to get married when she's 31. Yes, but so age, that's going to vary. But I would say that the time to consider marriage or the time to get married is once you really feel that you know the person's character. And, that could take longer with some folks. It depends on what you know of that person. But I know for us, and the way that I've seen it work for so many couples is, as I described, you became friends first. Because when you're dating or courting, sometimes you're in that infatuation stage, right? So when is not a good time to get married? Not a good time to get married is probably when you're still in that infatuation stage, where it's like the emotions are still very high. Maybe you haven't gotten to know one another. So that would, when folks say, hey, we want to get married and we haven't known each other that long, I always say, give it a year, at least a year, to go through the seasons together, to go through the different times of the year, and to really get to know one another, And like I said, that could vary for different couples. But it's, there's different stages, right? We become sometimes emotionally connected too soon, before we're just connected as friends. So you want to make sure that you give yourself, any couple, any person considering marriage, give themselves the time to go through those different phases.
Yeah, and especially, you bringing up the point of really wanting to know the person's character, especially, because as Christians, and especially, for us as Christians who are young adults, like, we don't look to date just to date. We look to date to find the one that we think that God has for us to be married to. So, you can sort of, I myself too have gotten caught up in that, talking about marriage early on, and it's like when we don't even really know each other to the fullest extent. And I sort of love the advice that you had of like, just give it a little bit, just give it a year so that you can sort of transition that way into really getting to know the person. Because what you said about the infatuation stage, it's almost as if when we're in that, the other person can do no wrong almost. And, everything is perfect. Everything, like the sun is shining on every day that we're with them.
Sunshine, rainbows,
it's sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns all around.
Yes.
But then it starts to, the real part of a relationship is when you start to really, almost something tries to drive a wedge in between you two, like whether it's an argument or an issue, and it's about how you deal with those things that can really test not only the other person's character but your own as well, and say, is this the person that I want to be with? And I think that's a huge point of really waiting for the correct time to be married, and also waiting for the right person. So,
well, and you know what I would also say, so when you come back to the time, again, not a literal time, but as a Christian, you want to feel that you've heard from God on this, right? And whether, for me, there was a very specific time. And again, that's another story where I really felt like the Lord said, okay, I was having some doubts. I was getting cold feet, right? Which you do. We were engaged. And that's where the Lord confirmed. So I would say, if at all possible, you want to hear from the Lord. You want to hear from other Christian friends. You want an honest opinion from other Christian trusted friends, because we've all been in view of a relationship where we say, we don't know if this is going to go well, right? I know, like coworkers, right? Non-Christians. Coworkers, you looked at this couple and you said, I don't know if this is going to go well. And you weren't that close to them, so you didn't speak up. But if somebody feels that way in your circle, you want to hear that.
Right.
You want to hear that. So
it's
that's
hard to hear that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
It's one of those hard conversations you don't really want to have, but you should too, because it's like you're looking out for them, you care about them, but that's not something people like to hear, I guess. That's true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
But do it in love.
Oh, always in
100%.
love.
Always in love.
Don't come at them.
Grace and truth.
Yeah.
Right? Grace and truth. That balance.
So John, moving on to another question here. This is something that is discussed a lot, not only within the church, but also I feel like just in modern day, of what the difference is between dating someone and courting someone. And I feel like sometimes the lines on those two things are blurred a lot of the time, and nobody can really give like a specific answer. So if you had to really see the difference between those two things, what would you say is the difference?
Yeah, so I would say dating is kind of vague in that you sort of enter, as we were discussing a little bit, enter with just, well, this is going to be fun. I'm interested in this person, maybe have a little crush on this person. So dating seems to be somewhat undefined, and which could get you in trouble, right?
Yeah.
There could be emotional ties that happen early, maybe too early, whereas courting seems to be more with an intent of this is a person who potentially I'm going to marry, and go into it with that sort of attitude. It's interesting. Several years ago, I gave a talk at the youth program at Grace, and it was on dating in high school. And I discouraged people from dating in high school, and I said, you know what? There's one of two things that's generally going to happen. Well, I guess there could be three things that could happen. One is you could date that person and then get married. That rarely happens where high school sweethearts get married. What more often happens than not is that you both get hurt and you end up not even liking each other. So, when you talk about dating and what that could be, sometimes high school dating sets us up to not only have a bad experience, but to then end up saying, looking back and going, why did I ever date that person?
Right.
Because you went into it with really no mindset of what the intent is or what the goal is. And I've had people, I remember people saying they didn't really like that advice at the time, but since then I've had people say, yeah, you know what? I dated somebody in high school that I shouldn't have.
Right.
So yeah, you know what? I like the idea of courting with intent that, you're not just following an impulse or a crush, but you're thinking about it as this could be something long term.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to have in mind, because I think back to some crushes I've had and I'm like, why did I have a crush on them? In the long run, you look back and you're like, I guess they had a nice haircut. I don't know, why? But then when you actually date or court someone with the intention of this is a person I want to spend my life with, it makes more sense in terms of you're looking at characteristics more. You're looking at, what do I want in life? What do we both want in life together? What is our life together going to look like? And having those questions and thoughts and being super intentional with all of that, I think it just, not that it doesn't lead to heartbreak, because you never know, but it helps to minimize how much heartbreak may be in the long run.
Yes.
And I always to students or, that are younger, just, it's okay to wait, it's okay to just be friends for now. Because in the long run, you might realize, oh, I only really liked him because he had a nice haircut for a month,
I mean, he had a really bad haircut.
It stopped at the hair.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Then after that,
so just wait and just be friends. It's not going to hurt.
There's totally nothing wrong with not dating in high school. I didn't date in high school or college. So it's totally fine. Yeah. It's when it's appropriate, that's when you do it.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, or it may have been, I like that person's sneakers, so they were really cool.
Or their car.
Or their car. Oh,
the car.
The car is always a big one.
Yeah.
Yes, this person has a nice car, so they must be a nice person, right? No, that's not how it works.
Right. This is one of my favorite questions, and something that when my husband Matthew and I, when we were engaged, was just a very special time. But why is premarital counseling important?
Very important. Very important.
I know multiple people who need to hear an answer to this question.
Yes.
Well, premarital counseling is important because you're going to get a view of yourself that you may not have going into it. And it's also going to force the fact that there's going to be issues. So I always go back, and even in the young married class, one of the premarital counseling questions often is, how are you going to spend your first Christmas? And just asking that question introduces conflict.
It does.
Because, well, he's going to say, we're going to spend it with my family. And she's going to say, we're going to spend it with my family. So that's just one little question that is really not a big issue, but it will show you hey, what about if Mike and his family, they open their presents on Christmas Eve? But in Katya's family, they open the presents on Christmas morning. Right. And you're going, how could you do that? You never open your presents on Christmas Eve. And now all of a sudden it's wow, I've got to understand his point of view.
Right.
And that's what marriage counseling does. And again, this is a simple example, but it dives into different things. What are attitudes about parenting?
Right.
Yeah.
What are attitudes about the physical relationship? A lot of that will come out in premarital counseling. It's essential.
No, it does.
It's essential. And
So for someone who's never been through premarital counseling, that question just like blew my mind because you think you go into, so many deep stuff, but you said one of the first questions, how do you spend your first Christmas? And then it's like a bomb drops and it's like that it opens up, or it seems to open up so many other outlets for, figuring out communication skills and what exactly needs to be worked on with going to see each other's family. And I'm like, it blew my, I don't know why, because it's such a simple question, but for someone who's never experienced it before, like that seems like a huge thing to need to talk about before you enter into marriage.
Yes. Yeah. And also, on the same lines, Mike, so it's also in terms of premarital counseling, you've got someone who can speak into your life and saying things like I would say to young marrieds is, don't play marriage. And I've said to my kids many times, that is an act of marriage. Like going away together when you're not married is an act of marriage.
Right.
Okay, we're just going to go on a camping trip. No. That's an act of marriage. Right? Or people today, we're just going to live together.
Right.
That's an act of marriage. So again, premarital counseling with a good Christian pastor at Grace or, a Christian counselor will be able to speak life into those things that society takes for granted.
Right.
That's true. And it also opens up an opportunity for multiple questions that you don't even, or conversations to have with your partner that you didn't even think to have. Because you thought, oh no, we covered all the bases. Like I know what they would say for this and I know what they would say for that. And then you come together and you read and you go through these questions and you're like, oh, that's a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. Let's explore this more. And it creates an opportunity to understand your partner and yourself better, because some things you assume aren't always the case.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so can I ask you like a little quick question, like off the cuff?
Sure.
So
I guess it's allowed.
So this is oh, thank you, Alexa. But so this goes along with counseling, and this is something that I've heard been done before, and it kind of scrambles my mind as to why people do it. What do you think about people doing premarital counseling with members of their family? Like, do you know what I mean? Because I've heard situations where two people are doing it with like the girl's father or something like that, or something along those lines. So, do you feel like that's helpful, or do you feel like it's detrimental?
Well, I guess I'd say, and I think it's a great question. I've never really thought about it. I wouldn't encourage that, but I would say it's probably better than nothing. It's probably better than nothing. Yeah. But I would say that it would probably be better coming from a third party who's not going to be shying away delivering bad news. Dad might shy away delivering bad news, or dad might not want them to hear that something's amiss. Whereas a third party counselor, a pastor, is just going to kind of put it like it is.
Yeah, because in my mind, there's that almost bias in the mind of whoever's doing it of, this is my daughter, or this is my son, and like you said, sort of shy away from that, and not necessarily play favorites, but again, like you said, like shy away from that bad news of, telling their son or their daughter that they need to fix something as they step into marriage. So that's a question that just rambled around in my mind, and I appreciate your answer.
No, and you know what? As a dad, I wouldn't do premarital counseling for my own kids. Like if they said, hey, we want you to do that. No, I want you to go to a pastor.
Right.
And and that way they could be more open.
Right.
Like they're
fully.
probably going to be more
that's
open
true,
with.
because maybe they wouldn't feel like that they can talk about certain things depending on who the family member is or whatever. That's
Yes.
I've heard of, I guess it wouldn't be premarital counseling, but it's like while you're dating. So I don't know what you would call that, but I have two separate friends that have done that and gone to premarital, like once they've gotten engaged with that person. But it was very interesting. It was almost like a part of their courting, like they knew they wanted to get married, but they went to counseling as they were dating. So it was like a premarital to
it's
premarital.
A pre-premarital
counseling.
counseling.
It was very like extra. I was like,
it's counseling for marriage counseling.
Yes.
Right. Never heard of that, but
Well, I like the pre-pre.
Yeah.
Pre-pre.
So they wanted to be extra sure.
Hey, not a bad idea.
Well, and you know what? Also, there's so many biblical guides that you could buy. Like, I'm trying to think of some of the authors, whether it's Family Life, Dennis Rainey. They have these guides where couples can do them together. Even something like that. If a couple wanted pre-pre, there's plenty out there. And I remember Joy and I doing that and filling it out together, and going through the study on our own.
Mm-hmm. Well, before I started dating Matthew, and he knows this now, but I read a lot of relationship books because he was my first courting type of relationship where it wasn't just for fun, but the end goal was, I think I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. So I was taking it very seriously, and I did those types of books, like Boundaries, Love Languages, trying to remember other ones, but just books like that to kind of prepare myself.
I did something similar too. So Mike was my first real relationship, and so when we started dating, I actually read Sacred Marriage to
I
read
that one
Good
too.
book.
It was a great book. I love that. Highly recommend. In preparation for it, and it really enlightened me in terms of what marriage really is. What's the goal of being together? And the goal is to glorify God and to represent God here on earth. So it's I wanted to make sure is this relationship going to do that? So I read it while we were dating. It's a great book. Highly recommend.
Yeah, and in that book he talks about marriage is for making you holy, not making you happy.
Right.
A lot of people will say, well, I'm going to leave this marriage because I'm not happy.
Right.
Well, okay, that's not the purpose.
Right.
It's not the purpose.
Yeah, it's a great book. And that, even just that line alone was oh, that's actually true. It's something you're taught that marriage is supposed to be happily ever after, and you're always happy, and that you're doing it for happiness. But that's not it at all. You're doing it as a reflection of God in the church. That is what you're to become more holy together. So that's the whole purpose of marriage. Right. And so if you can't get the gist, I really think you should read the book.
Once again, highly recommended.
Yes.
Highly recommended.
They're not advertising for us.
We get no money from this.
So kind of speaking of making each other holy, what does it mean to be unequally yoked? Because that's kind of the opposite of that, almost.
Also very Christianese.
Yeah.
If you
Also
want to break
Christianese.
that down.
Very much.
Yeah. So maybe breaking that down into what it means in colloquial terms, and then explaining what it means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so obviously we know as Christians, we know the definition in terms of the oxen being equally yoked, and so that the oxen can work side by side and plow the fields. And the same is true within marriage, that if one is stronger or weaker than the other, right? In the oxen scenario, if one is stronger than or weaker than the other, it's not going to happen. The field's not going to get plowed. And in marriage, if there's unequalness, if one's a believer and one's not a believer, it's not going to happen. I mean, you know what I've seen is that a lot of times a weaker Christian will say, well, this person's going to come along, okay? And they go into marriage and they expect that their spouse will accept Christ. And maybe it happens, but maybe it happens in 20 years. And they get pulled down. But also, they become, that person who was a weaker Christian now becomes a stronger Christian. And now there's more of a gap.
Right.
Right? So, we used to joke around about missionary dating, that, people would date and say, okay, well, this person's going to become a Christian because I'm going to take them under my wing and I'm going to marry him.
Right.
And, the unequally yoked thing is, again, sometimes there's flashing warning lights going off, and unfortunately as Christians we kind of blow right through those. So the unequally yoked, getting back to the question of the definition, is an unbeliever or a believer marrying an unbeliever. I would say there are times when if a person is a brand new Christian versus a real mature Christian, there might even be a level of unequality there, but I think the word is clear in terms of believers should marry believers, and if they don't, there will be a tearing, a tearing apart in some cases before it comes together.
Right.
So that's important.
Yeah,
that's very important.
It is.
And for even going deeper with that, an analogy that I've used before, in order to sort of show the trueness of the word and what it means on that. I use something called the chair analogy, if you've ever seen it, where if we have somebody who's a Christian standing on a chair and someone who's not standing on the floor, it's not saying that this is going to happen, but it's so much easier for the person on the floor to pull the person off of the chair and down to their level instead of somebody being picked up and sometimes dragged against their will up to the equal standard of another person.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's something that I've always used to sort of show that, and to reiterate what you said, that's important. And, you know, sometimes people may skip over that, but it's important to not only be with someone who believes in the same thing that you do, but also to be on equal terms of your spirituality, I guess. I don't know if that's the correct term, but to be in the same standing before God as each other.
Yes. I would agree, because, right, when you think about it, if you're going to marry and become a team, not only do you want to be equally yoked, but you want to have the same vision for your marriage and your ministry as a married couple.
Right.
So if, you know, the gal's thinking, okay, a ministry is going to be this, and the guy's thinking ministry is going to be that, well, at some point they've got to come together.
Right.
But even that is important. That gets back to what's, you know, the right time to marriage for marriage. Well, it's not just being equally yoked, but making sure that your vision from God, like if she's saying, I want to be a missionary,
Right.
and he's saying, you know, I want to work in the corporate world. They could both be believers, but their vision for ministry could be different.
Right.
Right.
And how they handle that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah.
Again, something you don't always think about of, you know,
Right.
we're both believers, but our visions are totally different, and sort of our callings may be totally different too, where God may not be calling the two people to each other, even though they think that, but they're really meant to go off and serve in two totally different opportunities.
Absolutely. Different capacities, different visions, different burdens.
Right.
You know, the Lord has burdened each of us differently. And so that's something else that's important.
Yeah.
You know, so the one other thing that I wanted to talk about, this really wasn't in our discussion previously, but because it's so popular today, talking about preparing people, living together, right? Living
Right.
together before marriage,
yeah.
right? That sounds like it's a good idea. Like, hey, let's try it out beforehand.
Right.
And you know, what's interesting is the research is done on this.
Yeah.
Like non-Christians or Christians, cohabitation has a higher divorce rate. You know, you could read articles in the New York Times and it'll confirm this, that, you know, it gets back to that scenario where you're starting the foundation of your relationship on this setting of ambiguity. You know, are we committed? Are we not committed? Are we together? Are we not together? And when folks cohabitate, it sets the relationship up on a weak foundation, and it just goes to show you that the divorce rate for folks who live together is higher than those who don't. When you start your relationship off on a firm foundation, Christ, but also on the footing of this is all new and we're coming together at this as one,
Right.
it's different.
Right. It is. And
It's
now you're
different.
like, once you're married, you're under that covenant with God. This,
Right.
you know, the vows you made, not only to each other, but, you know, with the witnesses in the room, but also with God there.
Yes.
Definitely a different weight to it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with one of my friends, actually kind of recently, about like that topic. We were both saying how when you live together beforehand, it actually statistically is proven that your divorce rate or even just staying together goes drastically down. But in like secular world logic, if that makes sense, that kind of wording, it doesn't make sense for that. But isn't it so interesting and also so beautiful that God's plan for marriage is proven statistically by science, by math too, to work better than what we have come up with ourselves.
Amen.
Right.
Yes.
You know, like, isn't that crazy and so amazing? Like,
Yeah.
Right.
that no matter what research you pull up, it's proven that following God's plan for how you get married is the best way to go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that covenant is important. And marriage is not, and I've said this to people recently, that marriage is not a contract. Like you
Right.
know, a contract is where, you know, you're saying you're going to give a certain amount and somebody's going to give you something. So I'm going to sign a contract to
Right.
buy a car. I'm going to give you X number of dollars and you're going to give me the car.
Right.
So we're both obligated. A covenant is not a contract. A covenant is a holy covenant before God,
Yeah.
which bonds you for life.
Right.
Big difference.
Yeah.
I feel like there's more of a weight to it than just like some debt that you owe. Like, like you said, I owe this person X amount.
Yep.
And it's like, nope. It's just it's a heavier.
In my contract, I will do the dishes if
Yeah.
you cook dinner.
Yeah.
That doesn't always work out.
You're like, that's what I had in my vows.
That's what I wrote. So that is what's happening. No, I'm kidding.
So I feel like the back half of this podcast is going to be me asking all the married people at the table questions. But I wanted to ask you guys. So for you saying this is something new and we're both coming together in this. How long? I know this varies for different people. So even you two chime in too. Of how long does that adjustment period, or how long did that adjustment period take for you and Joy, for you and Mike, for you and Matt? Like, because I know it differs per person. Some people can do it and just like not too many bumps in the road, but others will really have to work at it in order to make their living situation the smoothest it can be.
Well, for us, it didn't take long because we got married a year out of college. So it was like, we went from college to living back with our parents to getting married. So it didn't take long because it was kind of everything was new. It might have taken longer, and I'd like to hear from you guys if, you've kind of established yourself as a single person or as an adult. I mean, I was a college kid, didn't know much. We laugh at how little we knew. Like, at that point in our lives, we just, came out of college, got jobs, and then got married. And so the adjustment, well, our first year in marriage was rough, but the adjustment of being together happened quickly. It wasn't like there was a lot of baggage or a lot of, well, I'm set in my ways because everything was new.
Right.
Everything was new, as I think it should be. But I'd like to hear from you guys. You were maybe a little. I got married at 22.
I got married at 21.
Yeah,
so
you were. That's right. You were.
I feel like similar. Like Matthew and I we would get our first bill and we would kind of laugh, like, "Oh, we're adulting." Bills, like.
And then you get a month after month, and it's like, "Oh my god!"
Right. But it was like that. We were like figuring it out together, or like we would miss a bill and be like, "Oh, right, it is like every month."
But I have to pay these every month.
Right.
Oh.
No, I'm just saying we had like a lot of grace and like the learning, and that was just a silly example. I would say towards the end of our first year was like when it kind of hit more heavy was Matthew got really sick, was hospitalized, and he's been just battling with not only pancreatitis but also just like diabetes. And that was the first time I'm sitting next to my new husband, next to him on his hospital bed, and that was where it just really hit, in sickness or in health.
Yeah.
And just the fact that realizing, I mean, I knew this beforehand, but when you're in the moment, you're like, no, I do want to be with him through these really hard and difficult times. Whatever this journey is going to look like for his health, like I'm here for the long haul. So I would say definitely like the sickness thing was, and he's doing a lot better, praise God. But it has been a journey, and it, in a weird way, like I would do it all over again. It has been hard, it has been easy, but and of course, like having God in the middle of it all has made it like possible, right? So
yes.
Yeah.
So I was a little older getting married.
That's okay.
No, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But I guess for me, I had spent, like I said, Mike was my first real relationship. I didn't date beforehand. I didn't have a boyfriend beforehand either. Like Mike was my first boyfriend, fiance, and only husband. So like all of that. So for me, I didn't feel like I was super set in my ways because maybe in some ways, I guess, like I tend to leave doors open and I have to get better at closing them.
Oh my gosh, Alexa, leaving doors open?
That is something I
Do you leave the lights on? That's my pet peeve.
No, I'm actually pretty good with lights.
Oh, that's good.
It's
okay.
just doors. I'll open them and then I'll just leave them. So I guess that's being set in my ways and a couple of other things, I'm sure. But I think similarly, so I don't know when this is going to air, but we are, at the time of this recording, we're close to our first year of marriage. Like
First anniversary.
Awesome.
Yeah, first
yes.
anniversary. And so I would say coming together was actually pretty quickly for us because I think so a lot of our dating was during COVID, during the lockdown. So most of our dates were virtual and just focused on communication.
Oh, right.
So we developed a really good foundation for communication during that time period because that's really all you could do. You were staring at each other's faces on a screen and
It was
getting to know each other.
We were also, Matthew and I were long distance. I lived in a different state, but it is, you are more intentional with that person. And I'm like thinking, well, if I lived like down the street from him, I don't know how intentional we would be.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, because you can see them more often,
Right.
or like it's a different kind of dynamic too. So yeah, I felt like that that foundation of communication really helped us in the beginning. So like, if we did something that we were just not used to of each other, because it's still two people coming together that have different habits and different ways of living. I think we were able to be like, hey, close the doors, and I'd be like, okay, I can do that. Or whatever it may be, the big or small, I think that was a really good thing that we had because communication is so important in all of that. And I remember even in our young married group, that was like a major thing you harped in was communication. And I think that's a major thing throughout. I mean, I can't really look back and say like, because it hasn't been a year yet, but I can say for this whole year, like I really enjoyed it, and I've seen how he's grown, I've seen how I've grown, and I've seen how we've grown together, and it's just like, it's so funny looking at day one of being married, so what, October 10, and then looking back now, it's like, wow, we've changed and grown so much, like, that's so cool, like, that God brought us together and then grew us in such a way together, like, that was really cool.
Yeah, and now you look back and you say, wow, remember we did that a year ago? And like, wow. But we're always learning. And you know what, to your point, to Katya's point around the health and Matt and his, challenges with health, right? It's sickness and health and for better and worse.
Right.
And sometimes the worse comes before the better. And, it burdens me when people bail on marriage because they're going through a hard time.
Right.
Because to endure the hard time makes you stronger. We all know that.
Right.
And if you wait out the hard time, better times are coming.
Right.
But people don't think of it like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt would always describe it as like a speed bump in the road. Like, okay, this is kind of annoying to get over depending on how they're built, but it's like smooth sailing from there. Like the road is smooth, the drive is going to be nice. It's just you have to get over the speed bump.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just call it a speed bump.
Yes.
Just another one.
Fun story about speed bumps. When I was really little, I didn't know you were supposed to, I wasn't driving, but I didn't know you were supposed to slow down at a speed bump. So one time my bus driver, because it's called speed bump, I thought you were supposed to like speed up. So I told my mom that my bus driver was doing speed bumps wrong. So she's getting concerned. She was like, oh my gosh, this bus driver's speeding over a speed bump with my child on in the bus. And I told her she'd go slow. And my mom was like, no, that's right. That's okay. Okay.
Almost called the district. Fire this bus driver.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a side note.
No, that's okay.
That's a good one.
So, final question here.
Sure.
And this might be a little bit of a doozy.
Okay.
But for anybody listening to this podcast who is single, who is courting, dating, who's in a relationship, looking to enter into marriage, how can they prepare themselves? Like what is like one or two things that you would say that if you were to do just maybe this one or two things that you needed to make sure you did, this would be it?
I would say so I guess it's, if you're just preparing yourself and there's not a person in, right? If you're just saying, how can I prepare? I would say there's plenty of great books on marriage to start thinking about those. One is Communication is the Key to Marriage by Norman Wright. There's other ones by Family Life and Dennis Rainey. There's other ones by Gary Smalley, Love Languages. That's a good one to understand your own love language. But I would say if there is a person in your crosshair and you're saying, okay, I think I'm going to marry this person, it's to not allow the emotions to sway you. To wait for the emotions to subside, to give it time. And I know I've said this many times, what's the rush? Because let's move.
Right.
What's the rush? So I would say education and patience, and would be sort of the two things. And then again, as we said before, don't play marriage. Don't play marriage when you're not married. So yeah, there's probably some more. I know you said one or two, Mike. There's probably more that I could give, but I would say
sure.
those will probably come top of mind.
Well, that's a really good answer.
Yeah, especially the education part, because everybody thinks that they can, sort of make it through on their own sometimes, but there's no shame in going to an outside resource, whether it's a book, whether it's a person, and receiving advice, receiving wisdom from it, of wanting to just know how to do things and know how to date, know how to be in a relationship, know how to enter into that next stage of your life. Like, for me, hearing you guys just sit around and shoot the breeze about marriage, like, this has been a joy to listen to. I should have been taking notes the entire time.
You just listen back.
I'll just listen back. You're right. You're 100% right.
And you know what? You know what? Everybody goes into marriage thinking that maybe I've seen a bad example or I've had bad role models, but this is going to be easy for us because we're in love, And so that would be, Mike, if I'm adding to that question another, again, getting back to that, avoid the emotions, avoid the infatuation, and avoid the fact that you think you're not going to have to work at it, because it will. It will be work.
Yeah. Right. Love is not an emotion. It is a decision.
That's right. That's
Amen.
right.
Yeah. Decision you have to make every day.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
Very true.
Yeah.
So, so after 38 years of marriage, and I shared this with our group, one of the folks in the group said to us, 38 years of marriage, what were one or two of the things that you guys had big fights over?
Oh, yeah.
And,
I remember this.
And you know what? We had to think about it, and we said, we really don't remember.
Yeah.
Like, we remember having fights. Obviously, we did. Every married couple will and does. And what we do remember is that the things we had fights over were little things that got blown up.
Right.
Or misunderstandings that were like trivial and just became misunderstandings.
Right.
It wasn't, like, oh, we had this battle over this or battle over that for years. I mean, some people may have that. But at the end of it, it comes down to communication and having an understanding and being willing to forgive.
Yeah.
Being willing to forgive.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So this has been fun.
Yeah.
This has been as I said, my first podcast.
Yeah.
So
I think you did pretty well.
You're a natural at it.
I'm looking forward to listening to this or watching it and seeing what this all looks like and sounds like. Although I've seen other podcasts, obviously, but my first.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed it.
No,
Maybe you'll
thank
start
you.
your own now.
Yeah. No, thank you, John, so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, we appreciate it so much, John.
And sharing.
Yeah. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for this episode of Grace Speaks. Keep it right here for any updates about this podcast, any new episodes that drop, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.